I can be heard, right?
Yes.
Before I begin my speech, I want you to ask yourself, what is oppression? Because we think of oppression as when the state or the society makes impositions on the self about what you can do and limits your autonomy and your freedom. When you are famous and you are subject to the whims of pleasing your fans, pleasing the community, pleasing society, you feel like you cannot go outside without wearing makeup and looking the best you can. You feel like you cannot do something without maximizing your views. And you feel like you're always under the scrutiny of reporters and cameras and politics and communities. That is literally oppression, because society is putting expectations and imposing a way on you that means that you cannot act in a way that is freedom. And that is why ultimately, regardless of the racism or, the small microaggressions you may receive in society, team opposition supports the highest forms of oppression on oneself. So let's firstly look at setup. What does the happy, comfortable, this is a very generous info slide, I have to say, for us. And obviously you have to take the debate when you're edging it based on the info slide. Blame the CAs on this instance. But I think if you're happy and comfortable, what we can say is you're very likely living the life of Jackie Chai, which is the third speaker on the opposition team, which is that you are not super rich, but you are sufficiently fine off in that you have good prospects, you're relatively secure in your life. Maybe you're going to be an accountant, maybe you're going to be a solar engineer in the future, something like that, something that earns a middling or middle high income. And the thing about Jackie is that nobody cares about Jackie. Jackie is never going to become a politician or a celebrity. We have to support, he lives in complete obscurity, right? Which means that he's not going to be anything that white people think is going to make a statue of him in the future. But at the same time, I think obscurity has a number of really good benefits. It means that, while we obviously cannot model out racism, what we can say is that the racism that happens in Jackie's life will never tangibly and meaningfully distort his quality of life, right? Jackie has one or two instances in his life where he experienced racism. When he was a kid, one of his friends called him coin slot because his eyes were really small or something, right? And that's something where it's that's obviously bad, but it was a one-time incident, and then in the future, Jackie laughs it off and he tells it as a story to his friends as a joke. I think that's what we can reasonably define as being obscure. It's not a happy, comfortable life in obscurity if you're just experiencing severe racism all the time, every single day. Now, obviously on their side, they can earn a lot more money and they can be a lot more famous, and that's a trade-off that we'll take. So given that, two arguments. Firstly, a comparison of the worlds, and secondly, a question on what makes life more meaningful. Firstly, on the comparison of different worlds, there's three dimensions I want to talk about. Firstly, the dimension of security. Obviously, on our side, where you are living a happy, comfortable life, you probably have a day job and you are relatively comfortable and secure in your financial prospects. On their side, their prospects are relatively insecure because fame is fickle. Fame comes and goes in short periods. And importantly, their happiness is contingent on variables which are out of their control. Variables such as whether your video went viral. Variables such as, do your fans like the recent political speech you gave, or something, whether you're a rapper or a politician or a social media influencer on their side and all that kind of stuff. Compared to our side, where your security is based on something more concrete, like a contract, right? Like a full-time work contract, which is far, obviously, if you're super communist, you're contracts are not everlasting and all that, but it's a lot more secure because it's more in your control compared to the variables on their side. Second dimension is about relationships, right? On our side, you likely have a family who you're close-knit to them and you care for them and they care for you and all that kind of stuff. I think having a good relationship with your family is a basis for having a happy, comfortable life, so we can necessarily model that in. Now, on their side, they will have a lot more friends. I'll give you that, right? They're a lot more. Jackie is not very popular. Celebrities are extremely, extremely popular, right? But the thing with Jackie is that Jackie has friends like me who care a lot about him, but celebrities don't have friends that actually care about them very much. They're likely to be very shallow because you have more friends, so you have less time to bond with them. Secondly, those friends are likely to be very contingent on your influence, which means that those friendships are a lot more transactional and they're likely to fade away at the point at which you're not influenced. The second thing to say here is that as a celebrity, either, or as any influential person like a politician, either you have to drag your family in the spotlight and drag them through scrutiny and the accountability of the media, which is horrible for your family, or to prevent that, you have to disconnect from your family and not talk to them and like not participate with them, involve yourself with them, which is obviously really bad for your own well-being, but also for your relationship with your family. Also, you're more likely to get divorced on your side because there's more money involved in your relationship, and that is the key pressure point in most divorces. But secondly, there's a lot more alternatives for someone who is famous. Like someone who is famous can just divorce you, get the payoff, and then find someone else who is famous because they're a lucrative, woman on the market or something like that. Compare that to in the status quo where you are not sure about your prospects, so it's harder to divorce and you're more reliant on your partner. And the last thing is you're unlikely to have time for your kids on their side because you're usually traveling, you don't have time and all that kind of stuff. All these relationships are necessarily horrible. Compare that to Jackie, who has literally 5 really great friends debating against him and want to spend their weekends with him. Like, obviously, in terms of relationships, it's far better to be Jackie. The final dimension I want to talk about in this first point, actually, before that, Jackie, do you have something to say about yourself?
Firstly, I am the second speaker in this debate, but secondly, the sorts of experiences I want to have in my life are dependent on relatively large sums of money to actualize all of them. Can you explain why not having that capital means you get more freedom?
Jackie, the last time I saw you doing something you enjoyed, it was playing League of Legends, which is a free game which doesn't require you to be super rich or influential. So last I mentioned is about mental health. We're secure in mental health. We take joy in little things. On their side, they have a number of expectations. The expectations of scrutiny, the expectations of emotional labor in representing their community, the pressure to fulfill economic, obligations like contracts and the amount of views you have, the double bind of being successful, but also being authentic. Sometimes minority people, like rappers, right, want to be successful, but in being successful, they lose authenticity, and that's really bad. Fifthly, they have to take on the burdens of their race in any topical issue. And sixthly, this leads to stresses like suicide and drugs. Secondly, what makes life more meaningful? Even if you accept their benefits, there's 5 reasons why they're less important. Firstly, there's diminishing marginal returns on wealth. Secondly, the hedonic treadmill means that they're likely to have backslides in quality of life as opposed to the quality of life on our side, which marginally increases over time. Thirdly, minorities value relational conceptions of self, which means relationships with your families and friends is really important. Fourthly, minorities are raised with a sense of humility, so stardom doesn't matter. And fifthly, their harm is irreversible. If they land in a sex scandal, Jackie never gets out. On our side, Jackie is protected. Because we love Jackie, we are very, very proud to propose.
I thank the Prime Minister for that speech, calling upon the Leader of Opposition to start the case for opposition bench.
Hi, is everyone able to hear me? Yeah. Okay. POIs, just like put it in the chat or put your hand up. Don't unmute yourself because that's scary. All right, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Look, guys, I think it was interesting that David decided to analogize wearing makeup to systematic racism. I think that was a pretty Sydney boys sort of argument of him. The difference between wearing makeup and that form of oppression and the form of oppression that you get from systematic racism was obviously you can resist wearing makeup. Obviously, you can resist the public scrutiny, right? What this looked like was like Alicia Keys wearing no makeup on TV or wearing like fake hair. You can't just resist systematic racism. You can't just resist people around you making fun of you because of where you're from. You can't resist people around you making fun of you because of the color of your skin, right? Obviously, the forms of oppression that you were avoiding on our side, even if you were being comparative, were way, way worse than the forms of oppression that you might like sort of avoid on Team Affirmative. But I'm going to do 3 things in this speech. First off, a bit of setup. Then I'm going to talk about why material wealth is particularly good for this actor. And thirdly, why this significantly benefits the community and why the actor sort of wants to do that. So in terms of setup, what are the interests of this actor? First of all, like personal material comfort. And second of all, we think that they have a vested interest in giving back to the community they grew up in. Why? 3 reasons for this. First off, this community has, like, you share these same experiences with this sort of community and with this subsection of society, and therefore you relate to it, and therefore you sort of want to be there. Secondly, this community has sort of raised you and given you so much and made you into who you are today. What this looks like is this community supporting you throughout your childhood, this community being the roots and sort of foundation for you to come to this position. Thirdly, we think there are a variety of social norms that exist, especially in minority sort of communities, that lead you to want to give back to your community. Also, what does this world look like? Because we thought that it was a pretty uncharitable characterization for David to say that you were like always in the public eye. I'm going to have a couple of responses to that in a bit, but we think what this world looks like is that you have a particular set of influence, you have some level of power, and you have like a large degree of popularity. Fourthly, I think it's important to note that society is more progressive or becoming more progressive. So we think that the backlash and oppression that they want to talk about is just something that is general for all celebrities, but probably isn't as targeted as David wants to tell you. But now before I get into my sort of case, I'm quickly going to talk about this oppression and backlash that the affirmative team wants to talk about and why we mitigate that and make that why it's not actually as big of an issue as they want to tell us. 4 reasons for this. First off, we think that you have experienced racism and discrimination for your entire life, so you understand the risks that it poses. Therefore, you have some degree of like knowing what you are in for. Secondly, as I told you, society is more progressive, so we think that backlash is probably a thing that is going to be there. We don't think that people are just going to racially abuse you on Twitter and get away with it. No, you're probably going to have people cutting back at that. This is especially true because you're a celebrity and because you have like a fan base of your own, because you have public sway and power. Also, we think that if people are racially abusing you on Twitter, you can just turn off your Twitter feed. You have lots of people coming back at those people. Whereas on the comparative, on the affirmative team side, you're just a random person living in your house. And if someone says something racist to you, there probably isn't as much of backlash and there isn't as much of like people coming back at you. But Kat, I'll take your POI.
Individuals do not owe an obligation to their community just because they are a minority. Why does this individual have to be a social battering ram when they could just live a happy life with their family?
Yeah, all right. I was going to do that in the second half of my speech, but since you brought it up, I'll just do it now. Okay, restructuring of my speech, I'm still going to talk about the community benefits now. Why do we think this is true? We think that A, you have a certain level of influence. What did this look like? You had political influence or a money influence, and you have a huge capacity to help infrastructure. You have the capacity to donate to charities. What did this look like? This looked like celebrities in India going and like undergoing rural development, like helping villages and stuff be better and like improving the infrastructure. Why did we think you had the incentive to do that? This is a direct response to that POI. One, we think you have a vested interest in your community. These are the people you've grown up in. These are the people who look like you. These are the people who have experienced the same things that you have in your life. And therefore you have a vested interest in making sure that their lives get better. I think that if I was like looking at some random Indian people getting racially abused, I would probably want to make that better, right? I think it's just like normal human courtesy to sort of want your community to get better. But also it probably helps further your influence as a celebrity because you get a certain amount of reputation, you get a certain amount of clout for doing things like this. We think you can also use the media to spread awareness. Create forms of media with good representation of your community, things like In the Heights, things like Crazy Rich Asians. You can act as a role model. You can speak out about what this looked like was like Beyonce's interviews, where you talk about these systematic experiences that you have. This was, we thought this was especially gratifying because we didn't say you were going to be a social battering ram because you were going to have support and you were going to have against people who sort of came back at you for this, but also we think you allowed young people to see themselves as prominent figures, not go through the same thing that you have. Let's talk about material wealth. We think it's quite intuitive why someone would like material wealth and why someone would sort of get material wealth in this position. We are large salaries. David talks about diminishing returns. Maybe that's true, but we think that for an individual, they sort of prefer having a fun life rather than a stable income. and this allows them to have a fun life while also giving back to the community that they come from. We think that also this wealth extends to your family. You can help those that you love the most, help them prosper into things like old age. You probably broadly like that because you broadly like your parents, but we think that especially in minority communities, narratives of deference exist, narratives of like respecting your parents exist, so you're more interested in doing that. David tells us that happiness is uncertain, but we think that getting a job is probably uncertain as well. And it's important to be comparative and look at the scale of happiness here, because on our side, you have a constant job and whereas on your side, you aren't even guaranteed a job and you're likely to face as much discrimination with no sort of way to come back at it. Lastly, David tells us about friends and he tells us that he cares about Jackie. I thought that was a big assertion. Unsure if that was actually true, but we think you probably also have friends on our side. You have childhood friends, you have people you grow up with, you can still have a family, and for all these reasons, I'm very proud to oppose.
I thank the leader of opposition for that speech, calling on the Deputy Prime Minister to extend the case for government.
No, can I be heard?
Yes, you are.
Thank you. This opposition team has to engage in a likelihood comparison. How likely is it that you will live a beautiful and wonderful, famous life? Because David gives you multiple suggestions that it won't be that good, that maybe your life is only going to be at best 50% likely to be good. At least under our side, both with empirical examples and by virtue of the topic slide, you are definitely and more certainly able to have a comfortable and happy life. That is the benchmark in this debate. A certain and very, very likely benefit, which we can provide, versus a very nebulous benefit of fame giving you happiness. This opposition team needed to engage in weighing of likelihood, not just suggest that it could be good, because we also suggest that it won't be good. Compare that to our side, where we definitely have evidence for why it will be good. That is the weighing that must be done in this debate. 3 issues. Before I get into issues though, I want to extraneously rebut this wealth argument. They're like, oh, well, you need wealth in order to be happy. You didn't read the info slide, obviously, because you live a comfortable life sufficiently. Additionally, you can earn money by getting a job. If you live a comfortable life, then obviously there is skilled and unskilled labor that you can engage in. That didn't make much sense. Additionally, they were like, oh, well, fame means that you can get lots of money, but at best, this is unimportant because of all the harms that we give you. What good is money, which you can wipe away your tears with when, you know, you're about to die after being super sad and wiping away your tears? So we don't care if you have lots of money. There are heaps of people with lots of money who do not live happy lives and do not live meaningful lives. Just because you live a wealthy life does not mean that that objectively wealthy and financially stable life is good for you and your subjective preferences. Note, we give you that your life will be happy and comfortable even in the subjective sense of how you would want it. First issue in this speech, what is the benefit permanence in this debate? Note, this question is a weighing question because the team that wins the debate is the team that can ensure the most permanence in their benefits. Because we tell you that your permanence in benefits in terms of having a comfortable life as an obscure individual in world A is likely going to be quite permanent. This is intuited by the info slide, but there are a number of other real reasons for why this would be the case. Firstly, because everyone needs, like every economy needs someone to work in, and needs people to work in it. The more people, the better. There's probably a job for you somewhere for you to earn money and income from that. Secondly, they conceded that under both sides you would have family and friends. Under our side, you could gain happiness, and from that too. Additionally, you could also do things like self-actualize. You could be an artist. You could be a piano player. You could perhaps be live your life obscurely, doing whatever sexual proclivities you want. This team, our side, has the obscurity that is able to maintain the permanence of our benefits, and additionally, the info slide gives that charitably to us. Their side is fame, but this is an impermanent benefit, because maybe famous people are still famous, but that does not mean that they are able to gain the benefits of fame. For example, people who get cancelled, like Harvey Weinstein, it is unclear whether or not you are able to be a good famous person or a loved famous person. What if you're also just someone who gets sued as a famous person for having taken someone's copyright? Or what if people hate your music and you're still famous? You're seen as a joke. This team tells you that, well, the benefit can occur under their side. Yeah, we agree, but you need to prove that it's a certain and also desirable benefit that is permanent. People fall out of fame, people fall out of love. You cannot fall out of comfort, because it is shown empirically to be sustainable and also permanent. Second issue on the health of this stakeholder. This team has been so woefully unresponsive at first negative. There are a number of dimensions to your health that must be considered in this debate. The first dimension is your mental health. We tell you that your mental health is bad because of the expectations that come with having to do the thing that you're doing, i.e. maybe being a singer or maybe being a writer. George R.R. Martin hasn't released his own books because he's tired. And this team tells you that it's better to live that life where you have trolls on the internet saying that they're going to come to your house and maybe kill your wife, as opposed to a world in which you can do whatever you want with inside your home, where you could write your own books perhaps. You think that the other thing to say is that their responses just don't make sense. They're like, oh, well, society is becoming really progressive, so this rebuts our racism argument. So if you're a minority and you're famous, you won't be discriminated against because society is becoming more progressive. Have you ever heard of a country other than the one that you're living in? Maybe in Australia we are more accommodating of people, but if you're a woman in Afghanistan and you happen to become racist, for example, a number of politicians in Afghanistan and also the women who are news anchors who have been killed by the Taliban, it is unclear as to whether or not being a famous person in a variety of contexts will be a safe option for you. The risk of this team, of you having to be famous in a certain context where you are hated for your ethnic minority or for your gender, is a sufficient risk for us to avoid that harm. Compare that to our benefit, to our harm, where perhaps you're not famous and perhaps you might not have lots of money. At least you are sure and secure in your life and your safety. The next dimension of health is physical security. We tell you that physical security is probably pretty bad under their side, because maybe you are loved by your community and maybe people won't be racist against you, but there are people who are called stalkers, and those people come to your door, those people invade your privacy. That is an acute epistemic and cognitive harm. You fear for your safety and your own family's safety. The next dimension of health is fun. They're like, oh, well, you can have fun if you're famous. Yeah, have you ever heard of kicking a ball around? There are a number of other ways in which people who are not rich can have fun. You can go scuba diving or something. The next dimension of health is about relationships. They do not respond here. They're just like, oh, well, you have lots of friends. Yeah, which is why we gave mechanisms for why those friends are alienated under your side, because you're too busy. You do not have the same capacity to house them in your life, because they can't come on tour with you all the time, because they will be exposed to the physical and mental risks that you are exposed to. So therefore, your family is probably not in your life as much. And obviously this means the opposition hasn't proven a security in your health, whereas we have a benefit, permanence, and security. Last issue on community. They claim that, oh, well, you must give back to your community. 3 responses. Firstly, not exclusive. You can give money to your friends and family. Secondly, we think that mental health is the prerequisite to caring for your community. It is immoral to abnegate your own health and safety for the sake of a community. But thirdly, we refuse that you should take care of your own community. What if that community had ostracized you for some part of your identity? community? What if you were a gay person of the African community? You've been ostracized. There was no obligation to help those people. It was a liar argument that was given to Cax POY that did not rebut her material. At the conclusion here, we have not been given a sure and safe option of how you will live your life if you're famous, but you know you will be comfortable. You know you will be happy under our side. We affirm.
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for that speech, calling upon the Deputy Leader of Opposition to extend the case for opposition.
Cool. Hopefully I can be heard. If you're in chat, although I imagine if I don't take one, Cat is just going to yell at me, so it should be all right. All right, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. 3 issues in the speech. Firstly, on your material life. Secondly, on your family and friends. And thirdly, on the ways in which you interact with your community. But before I do any of that, I'm going to start by addressing the opening of David's speech, because I think it is a damn shame that David does not know me as well as he thinks he does. I've told him repeatedly that I am pursuing a PhD in renewable energy. I want to succeed. I am aspirational, and I do not want to live the monotony of life that this team would consign me to. What the fuck, man? I played League with you until 4 a.m. last night and you still don't know this. Shameful. David tells you that you are oppressed as a public figure because you are under the scrutiny of reporters and other individuals around your life and your community. But know that this is a form of imposition which applies to people broadly. We are all beholden to structures within society. We are all beholden to the expectations of our peers and our communities. So it is unclear to me why necessarily this is something which is unique to our side. Yes, maybe the scale is larger, but note that Gautam explains to you that you have mechanisms by which you can now deal with the scale at the point at which you achieve more financial capital. You can do things such as afford to pay for therapists. You can do things such as hire media teams to manage that side of your life so you are less beholden to the impositions of media and paparazzi. All those sorts of things which only become possible at the point at which you gain enough capital to do that. Note that this is unique then to our side because we are the side that accesses that capital. Their team then tells you that the effects of microaggressions are not that materially high, but note here that the cause and effect of repeated microaggressions is relatively major, and that it significantly influences the direction in which people want to take their lives. It discourages individuals from trying to enter certain spheres, etc. Insofar as individuals try and make that better, we think that was something the vast majority of minority individuals would celebrate. Cool then, given all of that, let's move on to the first issue in this speech on material life. Their team tells you that you can have a relatively comfortable existence at the point at which you work your day job, which is a concrete form of income. 3 responses. The first is just that it is not true that stardom is necessarily fleeting. Lots of Broadway actors, for example, have careers that extend relatively long because the roles in which you can play as an actor, for example, might change throughout your career, or you can continue releasing different types of music and continue to explore those genres. I think that broadly speaking, the role of a public figure is one that has the potential to have a relatively large amount of longevity. But even if it is true that stardom is fleeting, the scale of your income is much greater, which means that you can earn a nest egg early on in your career, which gives you a lot of free time at the point at which you are old and do not particularly want to work. Note that this is unique to our side because in their world, you have to continue working until you reach retirement age, which is increasing as the wealth inequality in the world progresses. We tell you would probably prefer the world in which you can retire early, even if it comes at a marginal cost early on. The third thing to say is that this is probably better under our side in terms of relationships, because at the point at which you have much greater amounts of free time, insofar as you are no longer working a day job which takes up most of your day, insofar as you are no longer reliant on that day job for income, but rather can rely on reruns of your TV show or whatever, that meant you had much more access to free time in order to do things that they wanted to talk about, such as access friends, access your family, spend time with them, etc. You are much likely to get deeper bonds. They tell you that financial wealth is not that important because of diminishing returns and the hedonic treadmill. But note that Gautam deals with this when he explains that, firstly, most people do not necessarily want to live comfortable lives anyways, so it is likely to be the case that you want that amount of money so you can continue to have new experiences. Secondly, insofar as the hedonic treadmill exists, it is just surely worse at the point at which you continue to live your single, solitary, comfortable life, and you continue at that stage of progression where you eventually get sick of that comfortability and you never have the capacity to progress because you don't have the vast amount of capital that our team gives you. They then tell you that minorities have a level of humility ingrained ingrained into them due to their upbringing. But note here that the vast majority of cases, especially say the children of first-generation immigrants, minorities are told that they ought to have greatness because their parents have sacrificed so much to enable them to have access to these opportunities. That is why so often you see individuals such as the Asian diaspora continue to strive forwards for greatness, for the most lucrative jobs, for fame and success. This simply was not true. At the end of the, Jez then tells you then that, well, this is a risky career. Maybe you get cancelled. You could say bad things. Firstly, for all the talk Jez does on the balance of probabilities, I would implore you to simply think about the balance of probabilities for this argument. The proportion of celebrities who get cancelled, like meaningfully and distinctly, is relatively minor and mostly contingent on them committing things like sexual assault, which is not particularly likely to the average individual. But also note here that insofar as you are happy, this argument about risk is relatively unimportant because the broader benefits of income are able to overtake that amount of risk because you gain a level of gratification that you never would under their side of the house. The final thing is that they assert that this comfort is something sustainable, but note that I've already dealt with this. This is something which is likely to eventually lead to monotony. We prefer the world in which you at least have access to greater amounts of free time. Secondly, on your friends and family, before I move on, I'll take Jerry. Sure, actually.
Yeah, so we agree that there are maybe some reasons for why your life will be good if you're famous. The weighing that we're doing, though, is that it's unclear if it is certain that you will be comfortable or happy, whereas under our side, that is just not the case.
I think it is deeply uncertain, broadly speaking, if, all right. So I think the odds of this debate are that it is perhaps extremely likely that you are not going to get cancelled. Maybe you do, but the proportion of individuals that would is relatively minor, and hence this is a relatively small harm for the average individual. But insofar as you are able to succeed, we tell you that the scale of extra capital and free time you're able to access increases your quality of life to an extent where this trade-off is worth it. Secondly, then, on friends and your family, note here that they tell you that you might need to hide your family away, or you might want to introduce them to the press. My question here is very simple. It is just why. Your family is surely broadly uninteresting. The media is not particularly concerned with the 58-year-old woman who works in a nail salon. They probably care more about the life you live and the excitement that you have. They tell you that you can send money to your family, but obviously this is contingent on you actually accessing that amount of capital. Insofar as you are able to do so under their will, you probably aren't able to spend time with them because you are working that 9-to-5 job, which requires you to relax and all of those sorts of things. At least under our side, you're able to sponsor your family after a relatively short time within the commercial industry. They then try and tell you that your friends are likely to be bad, but it is unclear why this is true. Celebrities do have lots of friends. For example, John Mulaney's friends recently staged an intervention for his drug relapse. That seems like the sort of thing only relatively close friends would do. These are individuals who continue to interact with one another every day, exist in similar social spheres. It is unclear to me why their friendship is inherently any faker. Finally, on community, really quickly, 4 reasons why, even if you buy all of their analysis about why the obligation to community should not exist under Kat Cheng's moralistic view, note that this debate happens in reality and people make the active decision to stay in the media industry rather to withdraw to a life of solitary privacy because they believe in the good that their word in the public sphere can do. This is a choice that people have actively made under the status quo, so proud to negate.
I thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition for that speech, calling upon the government whip to conclude the substantive portion for government's case.
Cool. Can I be heard?
Yes, you're audible.
Jackie, I thought David and I raised you to be a better debater than that. So this speech is incredibly disappointing in many ways, such that I am only going to be asking one question, and that is, what makes life meaningful? So let's go through all of side negative's win conditions and explain why they all fail miserably. The first claim they make here is that material wealth and security is incredibly important, so individuals can monetize off their preferences and be able to buy what they want and live a happy life where they can do whatever the fuck they want, essentially. Well, see, Jackie listened to the argument I made 3 weeks ago, but obviously did not understand it because this argument is only important insofar as the comparative is you get far less money. So yes, we'll accept the trade trader, that in a time when you're an influential public figure versus an accountant, I will tell you that yes, you'll probably earn less money. But this is unimportant because firstly, we still have financial security on the outside of the house when you have a job. That means my preferences don't need to be super expensive. Like I don't need to eat caviar every single day. I can just grind my Elo and chess.com and get a premium account. I can also just go out fishing whenever I want to. I can also just enjoy like Japanese food with all my friends. These are my preferences and I can still monetize off it, which therefore means the substantial increase in wealth is only for me to do things like what? Smoke cocaine every single weekend with my celebrity friends. Obviously, that was not what made life meaningful. And importantly, if you're already a person who was living a relatively obscure and relatively humble life, your preferences were not going to be so extreme that you wanted to go skydiving every single weekend. We tell you for the life you live, your preferences will be fulfilled with the security you had from your day job. Second thing to note here is on their side, they get less financial security. We tell you their wealth is more fickle. That is to say, it is based on your popularity, it is based on whether you get cancelled or not. And it's not just like you commit a sex scandal. It's like if you disagree with the majority, people might cancel you. And if you're like a particularly prominent activist who wants to work out for the community, these alt-right people are just going to flood your Instagrams and make your life hellspawn. Obviously, there are many factors which affect your popularity as an individual, and there's a particularly thin ice you're treading on, which therefore means it is not necessary that you're going to get this kind of high income for a very long period of time. But also, it is unclear to me why fun is the thing you want to have in the first place. Part of the reasons why celebrities smoke cocaine every single weekend is for the fact that they're trying to pursue a high they otherwise cannot get in their life because they already have everything, and that does not give them any more meaning. Just because you can have the most expensive food and most expensive goods is not something which makes you happy, which therefore means this argument is unlikely to be substantially important. And also, I guess Jackie's kind of mitigation here is that we've got money, you can buy therapists which mitigate all your mental health harms, but on the outside, you don't get depression and anxiety in the first place. So obviously it's far better on the outside. Importantly, the thing to note here is that we too, there is such a substantial diminishing marginal return to gaining more wealth, such that this argument is unlikely to have any grounding in this debate. The second thing we tell you here is just that more so, when you care about things like material wealth and happiness, that is unlikely to make you any happier in your life for a few reasons. Because firstly, on the outside, the info side presupposes comfort and happiness for us, but on their side, you're far more likely to be subject to the meals on hedonic treadmills when you compare yourself constantly to your other influencer friends. Someone else will always be hotter than you, someone else will always be smarter than you, someone else will always be having more fun than you, and that is what makes you unhappy. On the outside, when you subject yourself to obscurity, that is something which makes you far more better. Jackie, that is why you shouldn't be a pick-me boy, because you're always going to be unhappy because people will never pick you constantly. The implication of this is that argument is unimportant, is unlikely to have a substantial weight in the debate. And the last-ditch effort, which says, well, you can make money and then retire, is obviously a massive tension, because if you make money and retire, you will no longer be able to maximize the preferences they want. And when you see your celebrity friends continue to be happy, you're going to be far worse off there. That argument dies. The second contribution to debate then is, well, what gives you meaning is to contribute to the community and stand up for your minority community there. This is obviously tension with the first argument because they want to say leisure and free time is something which brings someone happiness. If you devote yourself to the community and advocacy, that is literally cutting into your free time and forces you to take on the emotional burden of the community when you do your activist work, which therefore means you probably can't have your cake and eat it too. But once again, Jackie, I've told you so many times this argument does not work in an active debate for a few reasons. The first of which is the impact of the individual on the world is incredibly marginal, even if you are an influential person, for the very reason that you will not solve police brutality, you will not solve racism, and you will not solve oppression. Even if you can tweet about Black Lives Matter, there are 10,000 other influencers also tweeting about Black Lives Matter, which means the individual impact you have is incredibly marginal, which means you probably aren't contributing that much to social causes anyway. So as a result, we tell you that this is probably not a particularly a thing which an individual often wants in the first place. But secondly, you also have no principled obligation. Note here that Galton just asserts, well, you care about the community because you are also a minority, but I can just counter assert, maybe as an individual, you care more about your family, you care more about your friends, maybe you're a selfish arsehole who only cares about yourself. But the important thing to note here is that there is actually no principled obligation on you as a minority, for the very reason that this is an additional burden which only applies to a minority, but not to a white person. Because for some reason, just because I am Chinese, it means that if I am famous, I need to care about Chinese issues, I need to advocate for Chinese issues, but all I want to do is write book reviews on my Instagram to no critique about whatever fucking race politics things which is currently happening, which means the principal burden on me to step up and do emotional labor to help my own oppression is something which is exhausting and tires me out and isn't something an individual ought opt into. That is why I think it is not within the interest of the other and just the minority to necessarily care there. So at the point where even if you believe this claim where it's like maybe you have an obligation to do this, I'm going to tell you here, it is tiring. You cannot make the world a better place. It is not your burden to solve oppression. The public scrutiny which criticizes your opinion constantly was going to be incredibly awful. So even if it was principally right, as an individual, you ought not think this is the thing which is going to make you happy there. POI, Jackie, let's go.
If it is true that individuals feel connections to their friends and family and other people close to them, why is it not similarly true that they would care about the communities in which they were raised?
Also proximity, because you often care about those who are in your immediate proximity. I care about people like David far more than I care about like someone else in China at the moment. That is just because I see him more often and I think he's a great dude. That is the reason why you ought to care about your friends and family more. And that is the last thing I'm going to talk about in this debate. Why relationships with others is the thing which actually brings you joy. And that is because we tell you, as a minority, the first thing here is that often you have a revealed preference to care about these things because minority cultures are based around cultures about relationality, that you as an individual's identity is based on your friendships with others and based on your family. That is why this is going to be a priority for you. Side negative team greatly impinges upon that when it forces you into a kind of twofold where either you bring them into the public sphere with you or secondly you isolate them. Jackie goes, no one will harass your family because no one cares about it. But paparazzi does exist. Your parents are stressed for you whenever you get hate message. Your parents are also stressed for you whenever someone makes porn of you on the internet. Those are things which greatly damage your relationship and puts a strain there in the first place. The important thing to note at the end of this debate, however, is that when you're on your deathbed, the thing which is important to you is your families and friends who are willing to tell stories of you to your grandchildren. Whether it is when Jackie fought off at some racist on the train with his kung fu skills, or whether it is the fact that he loves renewable engineering. Those are the things which matter because they're about you, as opposed to stories of even you as the best activist in the world. It is not an authentic conception of yourself. What is important is what you are to your family, and that's why this is the thing you ought preserve in this debate.
Then government whip for that speech, calling upon the opposition whip to conclude the substantive portion for opposition.
All good. Can I be seen and heard?
Yes, you're on.
In terms of POIs, just like put your video on and like put your hand up, and if I haven't taken you around 5:30, like please yell at me so I take a POI. But anyway, I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I agree with the DPM when they tell us that the way that this debate should be judged is the permanence of your happiness, the permanence of your wealth. But we take this on side negative as the permanence of your influence, not only just to yourself, but to the people that both teams concede you care and love the most. Those are your family, those are your friends, those are the people who are in your direct orbit. Those are the same people that happen to be part of that same community that has like helped you and that you particularly probably have some sort of feeling towards, even if it is not the feeling you have towards the whole community, it probably involves certain people within them. So with that being said, couple of things to consider in this speech. Firstly, how do we ensure permanence? Secondly, notes on personal fulfillment. And then thirdly, how does material wealth actually accrue? I think it's important to note before I get into that though, what the comparative of this debate actually was. Because note, aside governments like all their pushes pretty much like rely on the fact that you as a famous person cannot have things like friends, cannot have things like family. But we just tell you to like look at celebrities that exist. And it is not particularly clear as to whether or not they don't have family or friends. I think for the reasons that were explained, we think that these people just likely keep them private. That is not to say they do not exist. Like I don't have, my Instagram is not filled with like photos of my sister, but I do actually have a sister, right? I think it is probably just people, protecting their family and encouraging people to focus on their work. It was particularly unclear as to why it was necessarily true they didn't have friends or family. But even if their assertion was correct, right, it is assumed that maybe if they have less, they probably still have people they care about. Note, famous people are married, famous people have children, and so all the points of having people you care about that you want to impact in a positive way through your fame still stand that we give you on our side of the house, particularly if you just like look at the reality of what exists. I don't think the assertion that like celebrities are so unhappy, therefore they do cocaine is necessarily true. People that do banking jobs that are somehow living like this comfortable life probably also do things like drugs. University students do drugs. I just do not think this was particularly unique or effective argumentation. Okay, on ensuring permanence, right? And I think this ties into the giving back argument because this ensures some sort of financial legacy, but also permanence in and of yourself. I think it is particularly like disingenuous for side government to say that these people's wealth is not actually permanent. Okay, couple of things. People, when they get money, these people probably have financial advisors. They can invest this money and make them diverse portfolios. Secondly, these people often transitioned into things like producing roles. They probably own shows, etc. Note how like Hassan Minhaj was like a correspondent and now he has his own TV show. Like I think that this was just a particular example of how people diversify their income. So it was not necessarily true, and it was probably pretty disingenuous for them to say that these people were likely to be like not have this this amount of wealth. But secondly, right, we think that these people probably just do have the incentive to give back. Note, this is not me saying that they have the principled obligation to, but it is me saying that they probably want to for a couple of really good reasons. Firstly, they care about the people that they're around. Note, you might not care about like some random people that exist halfway across the country, but you probably care about the people in your direct community. When you give your family money, they spend these on goods and services within your community. This is probably a really good thing in and of itself. Secondly, concepts like filial piety. Third, support. Fourth, just a drive to do it because of what you've like experienced. And fifth, people just do it. Like I cite you to like, a million celebrities that do not have to do this that choose to. I cite you like Olivia Munn and Jeannie Mai talking about Vietnamese issues in the media. I think that this is probably just something people do, and it doesn't necessarily negatively impact them, and thus they choose to. They could probably explain why they didn't want to, but they've chosen to, and I think that is something that you just have to recognize in this debate. Secondly, they tell us that these people might have been ostracized from these communities. Cool. Even if you are a member of the LGBT community from these communities, surely there are people within your community that also have experienced the same thing. There are charities for people who are LGBT. Like we think that issues are more complex and more like, what's the word? They intersect in more ways than you think they do. And I think that this is probably just something these celebrities know and understand because they've literally lived it firsthand. I think this was particularly disingenuous and like was not mechanized at all as an example and not really well impacted in this debate. Secondly, I think that it is very important that this giving back is done by these celebrities. And I'm going to give you a couple of reasons why. Firstly, they want to because this gives them a deep sense of gratification, but also clout, which probably means their career and they get their careers better and they get even more famous. But it's particularly good because it is particularly good form of concentrated activism. So maybe in your comfortable life, you have to like explain to your friends and family or people who are ignorant why what they said is bad. But here's the thing, when you're a celebrity, you can sit down with a bunch of other celebrities and make a video that is viewed by billions of people that is particularly utile and effective forms of activism, which also is very good for you. And you can also shield yourself in a way that people in their everyday lives couldn't shield themselves. Because although side government wanted to minimize the forms of racism people experience in their everyday lives, these are still meaningful. This is still racism and people probably shouldn't be doing it, right? And so I think this form of activism that you can do as a celebrity where you have that block in between you and the racist is particularly good and it's particularly utile, and you are going to get mass gratification from it when you hear of people in your community, when you hear of your friends and family experiencing less racism and less discrimination day to day as a result of the actions you directly cause. That is why I think they'd want to give back. But secondly, even if they didn't want to give back, right, I just think that like people within their communities probably just appreciated seeing them in the media. No matter what they did, they were giving back in some way. This was fantastic for the people around them. They were going to be loved and admired. Okay, I'll take a POI from anyone.
The argument we make isn't that celebrities don't have families, but because of structural reasons, you're far likely to worsen your relationship because you're busy, you're less stable, you're open to more attacks, your family get more stressed. Alicia, respects the nuance, not the straw man.
Yeah, okay, cool. So people's families generally aren't super public. You can choose whether or not to disclose your like partner's identity or like your children's identity. Note though that people have differing levels of fame. So like maybe the Mexican chef who is the FAO advisor for South America, maybe no one knows who his partner is, but he's still doing really great work in the field of like food and food security. And that is a form of influence. Not every single celebrity has like people clamoring at them or thirsting over them who wants to like threaten their families or their girlfriends. I think you have to look at the scale. But secondly, right, I think that you can just do things like hire security. You can do things like, have internet protection. You can do things like advocate or give money to your family so that they live in like an area in which they will not, be hunted down, etc. So firstly, it's unlikely they will. But secondly, like it's probably just like you can mitigate this to a great extent at the point that your benefit to these people in your activism and just you being a visible person in the media has so much more utile benefit. So on that, I think that their families are probably better off. But this also just ignores the fact that many celebrities actually probably work less than somebody living a happy, comfortable life. And I'm just going to explain this. Let's just say you're a celebrity and you make an album and you only tour that album. No, you're not touring at the moment because it's COVID, but you only tour that album for a couple of months of the year. Maybe you can hang out with your family while you're in the country that you live in, right? But you have tons of time off to spend with your family. Note, when you were someone living a comfortable life, you had to work day in and day out until you could no longer enjoy the time that you had with your children. We think that as a famous person, you can also probably just hire people to like make your meals so you can like hang out with your kid in the time you would have otherwise been doing things like mundane household chores and cooking, because you spend more time with the people that side government tells you you love, because you improve their lives materially, and because the world just gets so much better, both for you and the people you care about. I'm so, so proud to oppose.
I thank the op whip for that speech, calling upon the opposition reply speaker to conclude the case for op as well.
Alrighty. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. The truth of life was that very few people were satisfied with the ordinary life of obscurity and nothing much else. Because if you look at everyone in this debate, for example, all of us have deep-seated desires and dreams, whether that is to become a corporate lawyer or to win worlds or to become incredibly successful at discovering new renewable energy technologies. Fame is something which people strive for, and they do want to seek things like material wealth. We tell you that being a prominent public figure affords you this without necessarily sacrificing your relationships. 2 issues in the speech. Firstly, on material wealth. Secondly, on your family and relationships. And thirdly, on activism. 3 issues, can't count, terrible engineer. Firstly, on material wealth. They tell you that their side stands for a comfortable 9-to-5 life of accounting, but we tell you that there are 2 important things which undermine this. The first is that they tell you permanence here is an advantage, but necessarily then we think that this negates a lot of their argumentation around your friends and family. Because the truth of this debate, as I explained in my speech, is that the 9-to-5 grind is something which wears away at your relationships with other individuals. It means you have less time available to spend with your friends doing fun things like kicking a ball around, if that's the sort of thing you want. It means that you have less, you need to work harder in order to afford your basic utilities, even if it means you live a comfortable life. Broadly speaking, then, we would contend that the celebrity life where you work shorter hours at a higher rate and a higher pay give you way more agency in order to access your relations. But the second thing to say is just that your higher income is also really good for you as an individual, right? Because it means that you get access to more experiences necessarily. They tell you that perhaps there's a hedonic treadmill, which means that you're dissatisfied, but naturally this already exists insofar as you compare yourself with your neighbors on a 9-to-5 scale. Rather than you can at the very least have the ability to have fun with your money. Jez tells you that you don't need to have money to have fun, but then immediately uses the example of scuba diving. I think this kind of shoots himself in the foot. So because we were the side that was able to get you the material wealth to satisfy your goals of aspiration and fulfillment, whether because that was you wanted to live a good life, whether because that was you were subject to certain norms promoted by first-generation immigrant parents, this was probably something that adequately aligned with what this individual wanted. Secondly, then, on your relationships with your friends and family, they tell you that it is much more difficult to provide for your family at the point at which you drag them into the spotlight. But we very simply ask you, why is this necessarily the case? Third affirmative tells you that perhaps it is the case that the paparazzi exist, but this is unresponsive to the line of argumentation we give, which is just that your parents are deeply uninteresting people, and they're probably not very profitable for the paparazzi to take photos of. Rather than, under our side, your fame and material wealth means that you can provide for your parents with that wealth. It means you can spend much more time with them as a human level, and you can repay the sacrifices that they made onto you so that you could have what they never had. This aligns with narratives around filial piety that many minority communities around the world entrench. The second thing they tell you is that your friends are more likely to be fake, but they never actually explain why this is likely to be the case. We tell you that you can always align yourself with friends who work in similar industries to you, or continue the friendly relationships you have with people from your childhood, given you now have much more time to be able to spend with them and engage in fun activities. They tell you that perhaps there exists a level of disconnect insofar as you are being targeted by systems of social media, etc., and bad things happen to you. But know that we already explained to you that the everyday consequences of racism probably occur to you anyways. Note that if you work the 9-to-5 job, it's very difficult for you to find the time to access things such as therapy, etc. But we explained to you that when you access capital and greater free time, you at least have the ability to alleviate those mental health issues, etc. The final thing to say here is on activism. Note here that we explained that this is likely to be something very fulfilling to the individual, their desire to want to pass on a better world to their children and others who look like them, others who embody qualities similar to them and follow the path that is similar to them. And note here that they don't respond to the empirical truth that this is just very simply what many prominent celebrities choose. They know that their activism has meaning and power. They could choose to fall away from the public sphere, but they do not, because they understand the value their words have to the people on the ground. For all these reasons, so proud to negate.
Then the op reply for that speech, calling upon the government reply to conclude the case for government and the semifinals.
I can be heard, all right?
Yes, you are.
Just one sec. Alrighty. Honestly, Kat's speech was a bit mean to Jackie, but I really want to acknowledge something that you said that really broke my heart, which is the idea that you have ambition and you want to do a PhD. And I say that's a really great ambition you have, but unfortunately, it's not your case because having a life of a PhD is not having a public influential life. So 3 issues in this speech. Firstly, the mechanistic issue in their speeches. Secondly, the weighing issues in their speeches. And thirdly, the principled issues in their speeches. So firstly, in terms of mechanisms, like at third, they're kind of like, well, we give a lot of assertions and then they just give a bunch of counter assertions back. Like literally, if you look at Jackie's reply speech, he's like, they make assertions about how you can't have friends, but we give reasons like you can make friends in your industry. Like that's literally an assertion being like, you can do something, right? What I told you in my first speech is that structurally, you have less time to make friends, that when you make lots of friends, you have less time to spend with each of them, and that because you're famous, those friends are more likely to be of a transactional nature. Those are structural reasons. Another good example is when we talk about money, right? They're like, but you can make money in the long term because you could be a Broadway actor, which is literally an assertion, right? But what we tell you structurally from first is that fame is fickle and fame and fortune is based on things which are outside of your control, variables such as how many fans you have or what videos go viral, unlike the conception in our world, which is based on like how hard you work. But lastly, and this is the most egregious form, when we're talking about mental health, they do give mechanisms, right? Their mechanisms are like, because you have clout, you want to chase clout and all that. Those are the reasons why you want to help your community and all that kind of stuff. The problem is, in this instance, their mechanism proves all of our harms, right? Because Alicia says in her third speech, when you hear racism every day, you want to give back. That is the point of the harm in our first speaker speech. Because you see these things and because you are famous, you impute this responsibility and this expectation on yourself. If you're a normal person, you'll never feel those obligations. If you're a normal person, that would never affect your mental health, right? Because you have you only have the incentives to do these things because you're famous, and you only accrue the harms to your mental health because you're famous. That is why when they're like, well, we can get security guards, it was silly because you only needed the security guards because you have stalkers. They create the problem that they talk about on their side fundamentally. All right, let's secondly look at the weighing layer, because what they do is they give a lot of attributes of fame, but insufficiently weigh their benefits. What we explain is that there are diminishing marginal returns to fame and the hedonic treadmill. Jackie is like, but these factors also apply to your side, like you want more as a student or something. This is correct, Jackie, and very good, but you misunderstand our argument. Our argument isn't that these things don't apply to normal people. It is just that the marginal benefit of being a celebrity is small. And given if you consider Jerry's weighing, which is that you're chasing a sink or swim life where there is a small likelihood of great success, what we explain is that that extra great success is unlikely to be very valuable. And that is the function of our diminishing marginal return argument. Not that diminishing marginal returns doesn't apply to us. It is just that the marginal benefit you get is very, very small. Let's lastly talk about the principle there. They say you want to give back to your community. As I explained, you create your own problem. Like, have you ever watched Spider-Man where like the line is like, with power comes responsibility? Like they're like, because you're famous, you want to do these things. Yes, when you're not famous, you don't need to do these things or you don't want to do these things. But Kat also tells you, firstly, that this is an asymmetric burden on minorities. That secondly, that the impact of individuals is small. But even if a duty existed, what I explained in my first speaker speech is you're more likely to fulfill that duty if you spend more time with friends and family and all that kind of stuff, which is what we support. But lastly, it reveals a broader tension in the case, because a lot of their mechanisms are like, maybe you can do this, maybe you can do that, but you can't have your cake and eat it too. If you want to be an advocate, you can't pursue happiness and fame. If you want to be a hot dollar celebrity, you probably are unlikely to want to care about social issues. And I reveal these tensions in my very first speaker speech when I talk about the ability to navigate between authenticity and success and the expectations that are placed on you in society. Because your life is far, far worse on our side, and because the life of Jackie is far, far, far more admirable, I'm very, very proud to propose.
Thank you,